So hello from Green-Mopeds in London. So today, or this evening I should say, we're taking out the Voge ER10 for a bit of a test ride and speed test. We've actually been asked to do this and hurry up and do it because people seem interested in this bike. We have actually got a few sold already, which is quite interesting because there's some of the feedback has been provided already to us about things like range, which we'll come on to. But as we always do, the first thing to tell you is a little bit about the background to this bike. So for those of you who know Surron, which is this slightly crazy off-road 6 kilowatt e-bike that can do wheelies and all sorts of things. This originally started life as a Surron White Ghost, and there are still traces of that brand on this bike. If you look at the motor, you'll see Surron mentioned. If you look at the foot pegs, it still says Surron on the foot pegs. So what happened was, I guess what happened was Surron have just become so overwhelmed by the demand for their light B in both its road and off-road guises that they decided to give up on doing this bike, and instead they sold off the plans in about 2019 to Voge. Voge are the sort of luxury division of a Chinese brand called Longsin. It's a bit like Lexus and Toyota. Longsin are pretty big. They do 2.5 million motorcycles a year and 150 odd thousand ATVs. They do parts for lots of the brands, car brands that is. So I guess they know what they're doing. But they've decided to try the electric motorcycle market by buying a bike and seeing how they got on with it. So hence why you see Surron on this bike. Okay, so there's a couple of interesting things to tell you about from the beginning about the bike itself. The first one is that it's a single-seater. Okay, so no foot pegs, no rear seat. It's just made for one person, which I guess most of the time is not an issue. Most people, probably most of the time, don't have a passenger. So that's one thing to say. In terms of its competitors, or the ones you would be comparing it to, that would be the CR6 from Horwin. Specifically that one because this is a fixed battery chain-driven bike, as is the CR6. Then the other alternative would be the TC Max. Although less powerful but removable battery. Okay, so yeah, you might be looking at all three. I mean, often people will dismiss one brand or the other really based upon whether they're removable batteries or not. So hence I said that the main competitor to this would be a CR6. You know, if you live in a flat and you can't charge the bike, then you might dismiss this one just on that basis alone. Okay, so but the other two are two-seaters. That is one thing to highlight. Okay, so if we start with some sort of general stats. So the TC Max is 5 kilowatt max. The CR6 is 6.2 kilowatt max. This one, on paper, and I'll stress that, on paper, 14 kilowatts. max, but 6 kilowatts continuous. So you'll see written on the bike somewhere 6,000 watts, and that is its continuous power. Okay, so continuous power is the one, as we said before, there are 3 measurements of power on these bikes. There's the power when you turn it on, as in at rest. There's the continuous power when you're doing, as you see on the Z5, 30 minutes of power testing. And then there's peak power, maximum power. Okay, so as I said, 5 kilowatts for the TC Max, 6.2 for the CR6, and 14 for this. I will already say I'm not feeling it. I think this is pretty comparable to a CR6 in terms of how it performs, but we'll give it a go on our test and see what happens. Okay, so let's assume that it's 14 kilowatts for now. Okay, I guess you are hearing the noise from the chain, and that might be a reason why you don't get the sort of feeling of kilowatts, 14 kilowatts, because, I mean, it picks up good, I have to say. But the chain will be taking some of that energy away. If you put a 14 kilowatt motor into a hub, like, you know, a Silence with 9 kilowatt hub, you would probably feel a little bit different to this. Okay, so that's the first thing to say. The next thing is about the batteries. So you've got the volts of the battery. So the other two are 72 volt. And that might be some reason why I'm not feeling 14 kilowatts. The voltage of the battery does affect acceleration. Okay, so if you had identical bikes, but one had a 72 volt battery and one had a 60 volt battery, as this does, the one with the 72 volt would, in my experience, accelerate quicker. But this has got a 60 volt battery. The other thing about batteries is the amp hours, which is what gives you the range. So what you do is, as I'm sure you know by now, you multiply the volts by the amp hours, and that gives you kilowatt hours. And that's how you can do a sort of like-for-like comparison of potential range or capacity of the battery. Okay, so this one, although it's 60 volt, has 70 amp hours. Okay, if you compare that to a TC Max, that only has 45 amp hours. But you do the math, so you say 72 by 45. Okay, and on the CR6 it's 72 by 55. Okay, so just on paper, obviously the CR6 has more kilowatt hours than a TC Max, because 72 by 55 is greater than 72 by 45. But if you do 60 by 70, you're getting 4.2 kilowatt hours. If you do 72 by 55, you're getting 3.9 kilowatt hours. Okay, so on paper, this has the most range. And the actual order is TC Max the lowest, CR6 next, and then this one the most. Okay, so on paper, if everything was equal, this one would have the most range. All right. However, one of the things that I'm noticing about this bike is what the range tells me. Hopefully you can see the dash. What happens on, for example, the Super Soccos, is as soon as you change the modes, and there are 3 modes on a Super Socco, the range changes. Okay, so I'm changing range now, mode, and nothing is happening in terms of indicated range. You can see I'm changing mode because it says Sport there, and now it says Eco. We'll come back to the dash later. But the range isn't changing. But then, at some point, it will. I've seen it go down, I've seen it go up. In fact, since I left, it started at 53, it's been up to 55, and now it's back down to 40. And as you can see, I've still got 82% left, and I've actually done 6 miles already. Okay, so I think what I'm learning about this bike is you can sort of ignore what it says for range. Okay, you will get to work it out as you ride around, and in fact that's where some of the first customers have helped. The very first person who bought this bike from us, which was actually I think the very first person in the country to own one, he has since said that he's getting about 55 out of this, and that's like mixed mode. You know, he's sometimes fast, sometimes slow, he's commuting, which is sort of what I would expect, to be honest, unless you're doing high speed all the time. So we did a test on a TC Max, but the very first version, the 2019 version, and we rode all the way up to Tower Bridge from where we were and back. That was a 40-mile trip, and when we got back, that had done 80% of the battery, and hence we thought, okay, well, give the last 20% another 10 miles and you get 50. Bearing in mind that was the lowest of these three in terms of kilowatt hours, then you could believe 55. So I'm not saying it's a definite. As with all ranges, it depends on the temperature and how you ride it, the terrain, the load and all that stuff, but 55 would be something you would expect. Okay. The other thing to consider is weight. So obviously I'm weight, but this bike is the heaviest of the three because it's got this lump of a battery that you have to connect to the bike when we get it in a box, which requires 2 people and a jack, because you have to essentially lift it up into the bottom of the bike, and it isn't something you can do with one person. So this is 138 kilos, and the TC Max is about 120, and the CR6 is somewhere in between. Okay, so you know, although you've got all that power, you are carrying the most load on it, or with it, should I say. Okay, so we're just going to do what we normally do and see what happens as we go down the A3. 2 modes, remember. Top speed is quoted at 90 kilometers, which is a little bit under 60. So on paper, that means the CR6 is the fastest, and in fact, the TC Max might pip this in terms of speed, but they do say this bike should be charged a few times before you get the best out of it. Okay, so this is a brand new bike. It's done 13 miles. So if you take it that, you know, you will get something better when you charged it a few times and sort of run it in, then you can probably understand that. The other thing to say, or the other thing to highlight about this bike, is that it is both water and oil cooled. Okay, so there's a cooling tank for coolant here. Okay, and there's also a oil cap on the motor itself that you have to put, or you have to top up. Okay, obviously chain-driven bikes do require lubricant on the chain. The Coulter, for example, has a little tank. The CR6 needs oil. This one needs oil, but also needs water in there. There's a radiator behind the front wheel. Okay, so something to remember. Okay, and there is in the book a schedule about that. The other little nuance about this bike over the other two is that there is a 12-volt lead-acid battery underneath the tank. Okay, that is being charged from the main battery, but it does say in the book that you can potentially charge it itself. Okay, that is to do things like the opening and the starting of the bike. So you can open the tank through the remote. In fact, you see there is no key slot. It is all done through the remote and the starting button, and you can also open a tank through the remote. There is a key way of doing it as well, in case the batteries are flat, and you do only get one remote, so don't lose it. I see my starting point might be interesting over on the other side there. But anyway, we're going to come off and do what we normally do. As you see, it gets to 57, brand new bike. No issues in doing that, but that is flat out. Okay, so we'll see what happens when we go back the other way, and we'll put some times up as we normally do. But no issues cruising along at high 50s. And I do expect that that might improve a little bit as the sort of motor wears in. Okay, just as an aside, this isn't the same motor that is in the Surron Light B. Surron Light B, it's a smaller motor, it's 6 kilowatt max. Okay, so, but it's still chain driven, but it isn't the same. Okay, so they must have developed this motor specifically for this bike, and then Vogue have, I guess, taken it over. Or maybe Surron still supply it. In fact, Surron probably do still supply it because it's got Surron written on it. Okay, but I'll just go to our normal place, and then I'll show you something more about the dash and stuff like that. So we'll be back in a minute. Okay, so some things to point out. So this was 95% when I left. Okay, so we've used 27% of the battery. We've done 10 miles since I've left, and the range has now gone from 53 when I started to 25. Okay, so whether that will change or not, bearing in mind we have been in sport mode down the A3, remains to be seen. Okay, so that's the first thing. So on here you can change to kilometers. You can set the time. In fact, the time's wrong on this bike at the moment. You've got your 2 chambers for ventilated discs. One of the key interesting things about this bike, apart from everything else, I guess, is that it has ABS. In fact, when you turn it on, before you put it into ready, a little ABS sign comes on. And the fact that the ABS light goes out proves that the ABS is working. Okay, so no other bike that we do has ABS. In fact, the next electric bike that probably has ABS would be a Zero at, 3 times the price of this bike. We'll come on to price later. Okay, so ABS, for those of you who are very concerned about your safety and stopping, then that is something to bear in mind. Okay, so general stuff, you get kill switch. This opens the lid. There you go, opens the lid, and in here you've got space for an open face helmet. I doubt you've got space for a full face helmet. This is the 12 volt that I was talking about. Fuses under there. This is your charging lead, because it's obviously integrated 15 amp charger. So charge it at the back end, and then that's basically it. Start button, as I said, horn indicators. Unfortunately, silent indicators. But you can't have everything rather, and that's basically it. So what we do, bearing in mind I've now used a third of the battery, it'll be interesting to see how we get on with our speed test, and I'll come back when there's a break in the traffic. Okay, so we'll put the times up as we normally do, and let's see how we get on. Let's go. $30, $40, $50. Okay, so gets to 50, no trouble. A lot of these bikes, when they get to their top end, they struggle, I would say, a little bit to do the last bit. And that is purely down to horsepower. you need horsepower for acceleration, and electric bikes typically don't have a lot of horsepower. You know, in this category, obviously there's other categories of bikes, Zeros and Harleys and all that, where they do, but in this sort of spec of bike, you know, you're talking about, if you think about it, 7.5 kilowatts, okay, which is obviously more than the TC Max and the CR6, is 10 horsepower. Okay, so, you know, you compare that to petrol bikes and you'll be like, okay, that's pathetic. And on paper it is pathetic, but the reason for it is you don't need a lot of horsepower because you are using most of the horsepower you get. So if you had a 10 horsepower petrol motor, you would end up with probably only about 3 to the wheel. Heat, you know, transmission of power through chains and all that, all those sorts of inefficiencies, noise and everything like that. With electric, especially with a hub motor, you are going to get from that 10 horsepower probably 8 to the wheel. Okay, so you cannot compare horsepower other than acceleration when you're using the acceleration of a hub motor versus a lot of horsepower of a petrol motor. Okay, so anyway, no issues with that. Getting there, it might not have been the fastest thing, but I don't think it's a lot different from a CR6 or a TC Max. Although again, if it was on paper, it should be different because it says 14 kilowatts. Anyway, we'll come off at this next junction and we'll just sort of summarize and then wrap up. So, just to highlight a few other things, you see the little icon is bobbing around here. That is showing regen. So, it doesn't talk too much about this in the book, but it's sort of suggesting passive regen, okay, which is the regen you get when you just by releasing the throttle, not by braking. Okay, braking is obviously active. You squeeze the brakes and it regens the energy there. But this suggests, and I couldn't get an answer for it, has it got active and passive regen? They say it's got regen, but I don't. It's a bit hard to say, to be honest. They haven't confirmed nor denied that it's got passive regen. But what I can tell you is, as I ease off, you see it bobs between the regen symbol and the non-regen symbol. Okay, but when I squeeze the brakes, it definitely goes into regen mode. As to what you get back, typically on these bikes, you're getting back 5%, 6%. Okay, so, you know, 1 or 2 miles. It's not as aggressive as like an Evoque or a Macrass Z8X, or even a little Ascol, which has active and passive switchable regen. But they are not going to give you 20 more miles of range or anything like that. So I wouldn't choose a bike based on that, to be honest. Okay, so that's it. I mean, the other things about the bike in general is it's quite long, 202 centimeters. Not many bikes that we do are over 2 meters, other than ones that have a rack. So it is quite long. As you can see, it's quite, I wouldn't say bulky, but it's got presence, let's say. It is a different style to both the CR6 and the TC Max. They're sort of more cafe racer type things. This is sort of a bit more aggressive in terms of its looks. It only comes in black, although in China you can get it in other colors, but here we are just getting the black. It's got a few green flashes on the side of it, which I guess point to some sort of electric heritage. I have to say the handlebars feel quite wide in terms of the stance, but you know, it's not uncomfortable. Obviously you can adjust the pitch of the handlebars. And charging time, bearing in mind this is fixed battery and it is the biggest battery. Like all of these things, you will be able to fully charge them overnight. Horwin make a big thing about their charger doing 80% in 3 hours. I just charged this one from 55% to 95%, so that's 40% in about 2 hours. Okay, so again, you're looking at 6 hours, something like that. Okay, and then probably the most interesting thing is the price. So a TC Max is coming up to, let's say, 4,400, 4,349 to be precise. A Horwin CR6 is 5,000, or 499 to be precise. Sorry, 4,999. This one is 4,184. Okay, so it is £175, let's say, cheaper than a TC Max. But as you can tell, it is £800 less than a CR6. So let's say that, okay, it isn't 14 kilowatts. It's comparable to a CR6. It might have a CR6 in terms of acceleration. I'll have to go back over my reviews to see what the times were for a CR6. It's got range that's comparable to a CR6. It's a different style. It's a single-seater, but it is on the grant as well. So the question becomes £800 less. With the 3-year warranty on the battery and the 2-year warranty on the bike. Sure, it's not perfect. None of them are perfect. As I've said, you are sort of guessing at the range. If you do the extrapolation now, 20 miles plus 15 miles, that's 35 miles. But that's moved 2 miles, and I've still got 55% left. So if that's accurate, if you extrapolate that, then you are down to, what, 30 miles? 30-mile range? I don't know. I think the only thing you can say about this bike is don't believe what it says on the dash. I mean, to be honest, most of them, a TC, a Supersoccer TC, for example, you turn it on, leave it, put it in mode 1, and it says 83 miles. You're never going to get 83 miles out of a TC. Even if you rode it slowly, it just wouldn't do it. And then when you put it into mode 3, it says something like 33. So you've just got to take these bikes, get to learn, get to understand them, and then work out what is the realistic range based upon what you're doing. Okay. What I can tell you, and what it does say in the book, is do not charge this bike below freezing. Which might be an interesting thing if you can only leave it outside over the winter. Okay, so that is something to consider with removable battery versus fixed battery bikes. Okay, none of them like being charged below freezing. This is not an ER10 issue. It is cars that are the same. Okay. All right. So in summary, fixed battery on paper 14 kilowatts. Not sure I believe that. Range. Not sure I believe that. But for the money, it's definitely one to think about, as long as you like black. Okay, so I hope you found that interesting. I find it an interesting bike myself. There are customers who have bought this bike who seem happy with it. I like riding it. It's perfectly fine. I guess if you don't believe that it should be 14 kilowatts and you take into account the range, it's sort of a bit making up as it goes along in terms of what the dash is telling you. For £4,200, it is definitely one that you should be considering when you do your evaluation. All right, so we have other reviews lined up, many that are being requested and many that we need to do. So please subscribe to our YouTube channel, which is Green-Mopeds. If you have any questions, then you can post them through the comment section of the YouTube channel, or send emails to hello@green-mopeds.com. And if you're looking for a test ride, then you're more than welcome. And thanks very much.